we are now joined in the studio by Doctor Francis Onditi, an international relations expert, to unpack what's happening in Hong Kong for us. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Onditi.
My pleasure.
Earlier today, we were just seeing that the Chinese envoy to the UK, Ambassador Liu Xiaoming, asking foreign forces to stop, and I quote, conniving in Hong Kong. What are your thoughts on his comments and on what is happening in Hong Kong right now?
I would say this in addition to what the ambassador said, that Hong Kong is facing what you could call an imminent threat, especially in respect to the one country, two systems. But when you look at this in the global system, I think there are two things that are coming out very strongly. One is the commercial interest of Hong Kong. Karen, you'll remember Hong Kong, if you take, for example, the airport, the international airport, it actually, in every year, it hosts almost, 75 million passengers, compared to some of the busiest, airports in the world. For example, the JFK in New York, which hosts about 60 million passengers. One of the busiest in the Southeast Asia, which is Incheon in South Korea, it hosts just about 33 million.
So it's integral to the economy.
If you compare this, it's a very strong economy and it has a lot of interest. But I think we cannot also rule out the fact that Hong Kong is a former colony of British. So there's quite a lot of external forces or external interest in that country. That if what is happening, it's likely to continue, then I think intervention will have to consider also the external forces that may be having interest, commercial interest, but also historical interest in that country.
Let's talk about the one country, two systems. Can you explain the meaning of it to us and why it shouldn't be undermined?
Now, the one country, two systems, you remember, this is a system, a policy that was installed immediately after the British handed over Hong Kong to the mainland China.
1997.
That is in 1997. And the agreement was that this is something that would go for half a century, 50 years. So by around 2047, that expires. Now, the provision of the policy are very clear that Hong Kong would be semi-autonomous. In other words, they would run their own system, legal system, the rule of law. They would, of course, the British left a marks in terms of democracy, governance principles. So we would say in summary that Hong Kong is one of the countries in Southeast Asia that also embodies the rule of law and the norms of the governance, principles of governance. But at the same time, China would also continue to maintain this policy where China has to remain, within the enclave of China. You remember, I think in 2018, China went on to close some of the envoys of Hong Kong abroad, simply because this one country, two systems has to be maintained. So I would say that, as a result of the factors that we have discussed, the external forces and also the commercial interest, the country Hong Kong, it is what we are seeing happening, the demonstrations, just a tip of the iceberg. But the major question is the fears that the Hong Kong people have when the policy expires. Are they likely to be ruled by China mainland? Are they likely to be subjected to the governance structures of mainland China? If you ask people in Hong Kong, they will tell you no, they wouldn't want to be subjected to that. They want some level of semi-autonomy, but at the same time, China would want to have a hand on it.
Yes, you were calling Hong Kong a separate country just now, and of course it is part of China. Let's talk more about these protests. Obviously, China and the world hope that these protests are going to come to an end in an orderly way. How possible is that? And what would you say needs to be done for protests to end in a peaceful manner?
I think there are two things, Karen, that need to happen. One, there is a need for mainland China to assure the people of Hong Kong that even though we are moving very fast to the expiry of the one country, two systems, the expiry does not necessarily mean that their semi-autonomy will be diffused. They'll still have their system going on. But I think more importantly also, the mainland, China also need to strengthen the semi-autonomy, so that, because what people of Hong Kong are looking for is really the ability to determine their own destiny. So if there is an arrangement and a mechanism that will enable them to overcome the fears of expiring the 2047, which is nearing very fast, I think that is the best way to resolve this stalemate.
Let's broaden this out a little bit now. How would you say Africa is affected by these protests?
In many ways. In the first place, I mentioned about commercial interest. If, for example, you see the demonstrations are now concentrating in the international airport, that has an implication in terms of whether business in Southeast Asia are going to continue or not, which obviously has an implication for trade, ties between countries in Africa and China. You'll agree with me that the ties, trade ties and diplomatic ties between China and African countries is very strong. So this kind of instability and disturbance will obviously have an implication on trade, and we are likely to see, the stock, exchange market, the stock market fluctuating negatively to that effect.
So there is likely to be an impact.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for your analysis. Dr. Francis Onditi there, an international relations expert. Thank you.